Hi, good afternoon, good evening to some. Thank you for joining our webinar today, Beyond BMI, the Science of Body Composition for Health and Longevity. We're very excited to be able to have Dr. Jordan Moon with us. As a, as a reminder, we will leave time at the end for Q&A. So if you do have a question, please use the Q&A box on the bottom bar, and we will leave time at the end to answer any questions. And with that, Dr. Moon, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Julie. Uh, so today, this webinar is really going to be focusing on a few things. It's going to be focusing on not only BMI and how that impacts body composition or how that's related to body composition, but also for health and longevity and really monitoring progress across different health and wellness patients. So we're going to go into a lot of things. We will be recording this. Will be available to you, so I may go through it fast, but you guys will have access to this later and be able to log in and get it either through ImpediMed or directly from ImpediMed's website. So beyond BMI, so what are we going to be focusing on today? Really, one of the main focuses we're going to be uh, looking at is fluid compartments and how important fluid is when it comes to body composition, not just the importance of that fluid when you're trying to quantify body composition, but also the importance of that fluid when you're making specific decisions to help your patients and your clients. And we'll see some interesting examples and some interesting reports that I think will help everybody have a better understanding about body composition in general, as well as some of the limitations of BMI, but also how bioimpedance spectroscopy specifically can be used as a tool for monitoring fluid. So we'll see some BIS outputs, and we'll talk a little bit about methods as well. So again, it's going to be kind of a dynamic talk here. So first of all, I want to thank ImpediMed for sponsoring this talk and let you know that Sozo, the platform that they have now, the equipment that they have now, has been, it's been developed over the last decades and decades of research. I've specifically been working with ImpediMed since about '05. So, and this technology's been around a little bit before that, but basically, in a nutshell, is bioimpedance technology, or the BIS system, is ran through the Sozo digital health platform, and the software gives the analysis. So it's a hardware tool with digital analysis in it. And we'll talk about more of the flow and the benefits and compliance and adherence to health programs and certain prescriptions and things like that. So the Sozo measurements allow us to track a lot of components, one being a lot of the body composition components, which is fat-free mass, protein, mineral, phase angle. It does show BMI, weight, and there's some segmental outputs. And we won't have time to go into everything in this talk, but we will be talking about total body water, extracellular fluid, intercellular fluid, and hydration status as it relates to patients who are either losing weight, losing muscle, gaining muscle, and kind of the benefits of understanding what the fluid is and how that can impact body composition. So right now, ImpediMed for Sozo has indications for lymphedema, heart failure, protein, calorie malnutrition, and body composition in healthy and unhealthy individuals. So these FDA cleared indications are extremely important to understand if you're working in these fields, lymphedema, heart failure, or protein malnutrition, then you already know the importance of fluid and understanding how those fluids impact those diseases. And if you're working in more of the malnutrition, body composition, health wellness space, then you might be thinking more about the body fat and percent fat and things like that. But there's also components to body composition, those specific fluids that really help us dial in what we're trying to look at, and how we're trying to help our patients ultimately. So ImpediMed's been using SOZO for this lymphedema surveillance program. So it's evidence-based protocol for optimizing their outcome. And if you're familiar with lymphedema or cancer patients, specifically breast cancer patients, you'll see there's usually an at-risk limb, and lymphedema is the increase in extracellular fluid due to either some trauma or medication or surgery, things like that that can impact the lymphatic system. So we use the Sozo to test the difference between one arm and another arm. I'll get into this a little bit more detailed, but they've done this long lymphedema surveillance program, and it's really been shown to significantly help the patient's outcomes and prevent a lot of lymphedema from occurring or getting worse in a clinical population. So that's kind of how ImpediMed got started with their clinical use. And we're gonna go off of that and kind of tie it into how the clinical use is now being used for body composition, but the clinical use and the ways that it can be used for patient success is 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 new, it's unique, and it's highly valuable, especially coming from my perspective, uh, working with a lot of individuals in the elite levels and working and teaching uh, laboratories and things like that. So what are we made of? So that's kind of a brief intro on where Sozo is with ImpediMed, and I've published a lot with their equipment, and I have a lot of experience. So that's one of the reasons why I'm giving this talk. I do know them intimately, and I do use their devices because I believe in them, and I know that they're founded in solid science, and there's nothing necessarily proprietary about algorithms that they're using. It's all based on advanced cold models. So what are we made of and why it matters for BIS? So we have about 30, 37 trillion cells. Me, I probably have a little bit more. I'm a little bigger guy. Our body water typically ranges from about 50 to 70%, and that's important to understand because shifts in that body water can be large indicators of some health risks and and other health related concerns. But of all of that 50 to 70% water as a percentage of our mass, when we look at it from a molecular level, it's water is pretty much everything. It's 99.999% of all of our molecules because they are very small molecules. So bioimpedance allows us to measure the fluid within a mammal. And we do this through impedance and basically sending less electrical current through your body and measuring the resistance and reactance that your cells in your body has to that current. And from understanding that, we can start quantifying these fluids. Now, when we're looking at molecular breakdown, uh, we also have to look at at the cellular level. So if we have 37.2 trillion cells or 30 trillion cells, and our molecules are 99.999% of all of our molecules, then what is in our non-water compartment? So here you can see protein is 55% of our non-fluid, and that includes all of our proteins in our body, not just muscle protein. And then we have a little bit of lipid, and this depends on the individual, and then RNA as well. But what I want you to understand from this is at the cellular level, we have millions and billions and trillions of molecules, septillions of fat molecules, and We're trying to quantify this in a living human, and it's tricky to do. And bioimpedance spectroscopy is a clear method that can help identify the molecular breakdown of the water that's in your body. And from there, we can get an idea of how the cells are functioning, and we'll get into that a little bit more. And it's pretty exciting stuff. But from this slide, I just want you to understand we're almost all water. Water is very important. It's very dynamic, and we'll talk about how it's dynamic. So understanding water is extremely important and valuable for clinicians and researchers when we're tracking changes in health and performance markers. So when we're building these cells, right, this is just another version of that last slide of how we're so much water and water is so dynamic compared to our protein, our RNA, and our lipids. Our carbs are also dynamic. Obviously, if you're going out and exercising heavy, you're going to deplete some glycogen stores. But our water's turning over all the time and it's everywhere in our body, and we have a ton of it. So, monitoring how the water's moving in our body inside and outside of cells, from upper limbs to lower limbs, from one limb to another, from your limbs to your torso or torso to your limbs, is all extremely valuable when you're trying to understand the health and quality of life for each individual. So if we look at all the cells and break those down into molecules, now we're talking about an octillion molecules. That's one followed by 27 zeros. That's a huge number. So I want you to try to understand how many molecules we're trying to quantify and how dynamic they are when we're trying to quantify body composition. So if, say, your body contained over 100 octillion molecules, just roughly, that cover the United States in dollar bills, and that would be 625 miles thick, covering the entire US in dollar bills. That's a magnitude of the number of molecules we're working with. So again, it's a big number, and we're trying to simplify that down into liters or pints or pounds or fat or lipid or uh, muscle mass. So it's extremely difficult. So the way bioimpedance spectroscopy works is it measures both intracellularly and extracellularly by sending different frequencies through the body and through the cells. So the biggest things that we get from BIS is this raw resistance at infinite and resistance at zero. And this is different than a single frequency bioimpedance device that maybe uses 50 kilohertz. BIS technology uses a greater amount of frequencies. And in PetiMed's case with the SOZO, they use 256 different frequencies. So then we get this, what's called a Cole plot or a Cole model. And we can look at low frequencies and high frequencies and actually determine the fluid content of the extracellular compartment and the intercellular compartment. And knowing how those are shifting is a great indicator of performance, recovery, health, wellness, just well-being. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. So just the basic understanding of bioimpedance, we measure really two things. We measure the resistance and the reactance of the current through the body. And the reactance is more of how the cells that are a little bit electrical are responding to that current. And resistance is more just your body's resistance to that entire overall current. So from that, if we plot resistance and reactance, we can determine impedance or determine the vector of impedance. Using all this information from 256 frequencies, you can then quantify fluid if you know the length or the size of those compartments, and SOZO does all of that, and other BIS technology. So what's the composition of the fluids in the intercellular and extracellular space? We kind of have to assume those are constant. and the interaction of the current at the cellular and the cell membrane and the small little electricity that the body makes is along the same path as traveled. And then obviously that there's a relationship between tissue and fluid, which we'll talk about here in a second. So how do we break the body down using bioimpedance? So if we look at it from a big picture, from the top down, we have muscle and organs, we have metabolically active tissues, right? All these tissues contain intercellular, extracellular fluid. They contain protein. Some contain bone, fat. All of that's in there. So the first thing that BIS does is breaks down the ICF and ECF and actually adds those back together to get total body water. So we pull out the ECF, pull out the ICF, and then the bone itself is not really conductive. The only things that the electric current's really looking at is the intracellular fluid and the extracellular fluid, because that's what's conductive. And we get into that, it'd be a whole different webinar. But it's important to understand that the electrical signal that this technology is pushing through your body and what's being measured is in those fluid compartments. So fat itself is actually an insulator to that electric current. So the faster that signal's going, or the less resistance to the current, the less fat you typically have, versus the more fat you have, the more that signal has to kind of weave its way around, and it's kind of slowed down, a little bit of a traffic jam as it's trying to work around the fat. So we get an idea of fat and muscle can be determined from just these ICF and ECFs if we know some constants. So LDEX is for use for lymphedema. We're looking at, is there a change in fluid from one arm to the other arm, from one leg to another leg? And usually there's indicators for there's going to be an at-risk arm, whether surgery was performed near the lymph nodes or other indications. So what we look at is just kind of the normal health of extracellular fluid, muscle and tissue, and fat. So we get normal healthy volumes, and we can then track those normal healthy volumes. So if you increase your fluid volume due to muscle gain, both muscle or fat, you're going to see an increase in fluid. Uh, in terms of pure fat increase, typically you won't see so much change in fluid. So, as you're looking at someone's fluid changing over time, if there's an increase in volume due to muscle gain or both muscle and fat, then we're gonna see that in the tissue compartments. But if it's due to weight gain and really no additional physical efforts, you see an increase in weight gain, it's probably going to be reported as fat, but we'll break this down a little bit more. And and at least this is in lymphedema patients. So we're able to look at lymphedema patients and understand if it's really muscle, if it's extracellular fluid, and if it's lymphatic tissue that's turning into fat. So we use body composition in lymphedema patients, and it's extremely valuable for detecting how they're changing, whether it's pure lymph fluid in the extracellular space, or if it's changing into fat, or if this person's or these patients are actually lifting weights, getting stronger, if it's whether or not it's muscle or protein. So BIS and SOZO provides this comprehensive analysis. It breaks the body down of fluid, shows you the tissues, and it gives you some metabolic report. Uh, it's kind of a one-stop shop, which I like. Earlier devices that Impediment had, earlier BIS devices that other companies have, um, and everything that's on the market that I've seen from a BIS, it doesn't provide this comprehensive from the scale to to your actionable results right on a tablet. That's shareable and it's already integrated into uh, uh, your electronic medical records and things like that. So been validated against BIS has been validated against dilution techniques. We'll talk a little bit about that. But again, this technique, not necessarily the SOZO itself, but the technique of BIS and the mathematical models used have been used for over 25, 30 plus years and has a solid foundation in being able to identify health-related risk factors as well as changes in muscle and body composition with training and diet and elite sports. So we have to understand why fluid is changing. And if we understand why fluid is changing, then we can interpret how the body composition is going to change relative to that fluid. So how's this all tied to BMI? Well, we're going to get to that because it's extremely valuable when you're dealing with patients, especially patients that are coming in regularly, to understand how their fluid is being dynamic. So when we're looking at a model, a mathematical model, or an entire model, say a DEXA scan, a 3D scanner, or something else that produces body composition data, we want it to be both precise and accurate. And precision is the ability to measure the same measurement over time. If I do the same 5 measurements over and over and over again, am I going to get the same results? Now, the issue with precision is you can have a very precise device, like in this example here, where we have a device that gives 98.5 grams every time, but it should be giving closer to 100 grams. So in that case, this device is precise, it's just not accurate. So when we're dealing with body composition devices, we have to have devices that are both highly accurate and precise. So if I have a scale that weighs 100 grams, should be weighing 100 grams, and it's weighing 99.8, now that's much more accurate. Now I need to improve the precision on that device. And these are some of the rigor that we have to go through when we're dealing with medical equipment that's doing body composition analysis. And a lot of other bioimpedance manufacturers don't have the rigor to make some of the analysis and the claims that ImpediMed can do because they're founded in clinic and lymphedema and cancer spaces and other clinical FDA approved spaces. So when we break the body down into its compartments, we talked a little bit about cellular, we talked a little bit about molecular, but when we break the body down into compartments, we basically look at everything as from a molecular level or a tissue level. And BIS allows us to look at both the molecular level and the tissue level for body composition factors. So some factors may be tissue, some factors may be molecules. If you do a bod pod, if you do a DEXA underwater weighing or bioimpedance device that you get at home, most of those break it down into a two compartment, right? And the two compartment model here is just fat and fat-free mass, and it's valuable, but it doesn't really provide you with enough information to make actionable decisions on the data and how things are changing. It's generally good enough for non-clinical use because you can say, hey, your fat-free mass is increasing, but you must be getting stronger or more muscular. But we know fat-free mass is more than just muscle. It's all your organs and it's all your fluid. So if we break the body down into its fluid compartment separately, then we can get an accurate idea of what's going on body compositionally. So every method is a little bit different, and each method has its own issues. And what we see is when we compare models to what the real gold standard is, which is this 6 compartment model and breaks the body down into its atomic levels. If we compare to that, molecular models and tissue models, everything provides a certain level of validity, but every individual is affected differently because we have chemical constants that we have to assume. So, regardless of the device, compared to a 5C model, a 6C model, in say this individual who has a BMI of 30 You can see his bod pod, underwater wing, and DEXA, Futra, like all these different devices are producing different percent body fats. And then this female here, whose BMI is 22.9, you can see the difference between bod pod, underwater weighing, and DEXA. And typically what we see is there's error associated with about 3 to 4% compared to a reference model. So if a reference model says you're 20% fat, or if you're really 20% fat, most of these models, the more advanced models, will produce a value that's plus or minus 4 or 5% to that. So somewhere between 15 and 16% or 24 and 25%. That's the range which your body fat will be in from those different devices. And two different people that have the exact same BMI, slightly different builds, or even the same build are going to be affected differently by the different devices. Don't have time to go into all the different devices and limitations, but I wanted to show you here how individually variable all these devices are. And it's not always the case where, one may be higher, one may be lower, one may be better than the other for a different person, but we have limitations in all the models that we're trying to use for body composition. DEXA is not a gold standard for anything other than bone mineral density. It's not a body composition gold standard, even though it's been used as a comparison. Uh, there are massive limitations to DEXA as there are to underwater weighing, bod pod, and other technologies. It's not necessarily is one better than the other. It's are you using yours correctly and interpreting it correctly? Because if they're using it if you're using it correctly, you're using it appropriately, they should all have roughly the same amount of error when it comes to predicting actual body fat. So another thing in this I wanted to bring to your attention is that BMI here 22.9 is much different than her actual 28.1, and in the male here with 30 versus 16% is massively higher than any variable. Like the association between percent fat and BMI is not great. So when we look at BIS data in terms of is it valid compared to MRI, and so skeletal muscle mass is a tissue, and the tissue true gold standards are MRI and CT imaging technology. So when we look at the arms and the legs, we see high correlations, as well as when we compare to other methods that produce similar errors to fluid-based measurements as compared to DEXA, segmental lean soft tissue. So when we're looking at the arms and the legs, 75% of our muscles in our arms are legs. So the importance of measuring the arms and the legs when it comes to tissue prediction models or tissue conversions from a fluid to a tissue, it's extremely important to understand the limbs. So in DEXA, the torso gets confused with all the organs and everything. So when we look at the arms and the legs, almost all of the lean soft tissue in your arms and legs is skeletal muscle mass. So it gives us a good way to predict. And you can see here that there's also high correlations with that. And then when we look at ECF to dilution techniques, correlations with total body water, and deuterium oxide dilution techniques, you see very similar, extremely high R values. And this has been done again for 20 some years. So the data is there. We know BIS works. SOZO itself has been done. You can see some of my earlier studies here on earlier technology that has been advanced to the SOZO to make it more user friendly, specifically for the clinician, where they just stand on and measure it versus placing specific electrodes on. So comparing its tissue analysis to DEXA, we see a very strong correlation as well, because both of those have somewhat similar assumptions, these chemical constants of how much fluid is in my fat-free mass, or how much fat-free mass do I have if I know my fluid. They're very similar assumptions, so we see a high correlations and a high agreement between BIS and DEXA as well as other technologies. I won't get into that. There's a long talk I get into about that. So the rest of this talk, we really want to talk, I'm going to focus on the actionable results, or so making actual decisions based on fluid data and composition-based data. So this is an example of a SOZO output where you're seeing there's a baseline and a measure, and then you're seeing a scale, basically z-scores, and you have normal ranges based on population norms and healthy populations. So it kind of gives you an idea of, hey, where this person is and where they fit on a line relative to other individuals. Now, it's one measure will never tell you everything. It'll tell you enough to kind of get you to understand possibly what's going on, but you need multiple measurements in order to truly understand what's going on from a compositional perspective over time. And fluid is a great indicator to determine what changes are happening from other compositional components like muscle mass and fat mass. So how are we applying this? How are we gaining additional insight for as a clinician or a practitioner? So you're detecting changes in fluid and you're detecting changes in muscle and fat. You're looking at way more than just BMI. You're looking at is my weight intervention, is my GLP-1 medication, is my training program, are all these producing the results that I want to see? Is this patient being successful in the program that I'm applying to them? And there's a lot of variables, and I'm going to show you some really cool ones that will help us understand some of that. And then this also, the outputs allow you to kind of set healthy targets. So, hey, you're a little below here. It'd be great if we get your skeletal muscle mass a little bit higher. You have surgery coming up, you have this going on, you're getting older, all of these other components. But it gives you a visual aid. And patients really appreciate that. So we understand that we need to really learn about body water and how it's being impacted in our body because it is such an indicator of disease. But water is also dynamic. So if I measure my body water in the morning and go about my day and then measure it at the end of the day, there's going to be all sorts of changes in fluid. My fluid, if I'm walking around, I'm standing all day, sitting all day, my fluid's going to slowly shift into my lower body just due to gravity alone. We lose about 9% of our total body water every day. And that doesn't include if you're outside in heat, if you're exercising in in a hot, humid climate, that number goes up, 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 up. So we're constantly in this dynamic state of fluid flux. So water and drink, we're consuming fluid, but the rest of our day, our body's trying to get rid of it. It's trying to keep us cool. It's trying to do metabolic processes, and it needs water in order to do that. And it's dynamic. It's always doing that. So this slide just shows you a bunch of different ways uh, in which water can impact your health, or which way water can be added or removed. And really, it's added. It's through IV or fluids, but we burn a lot in metabolism, uh, obviously urine and feces, and then medications and the environmental factors that I talked about. But when you have specific medications that you know will impact fluid, it's in your best interest to measure that fluid to see how it's being impacted, right? For a diuretic or other medication that we know is going to cause water retention. And that's something that we can manage and monitor and improve if it was with compression sleeves or a diuretic or something else to reduce that water. So here's a good example. And me coming from more of an athlete background and working with elite athletes, we talk more about changes, and not necessarily in their health, but changes in their water relative to changes in their diet and exercise. So we have a lot of water associated with both glycogen and creatine. So creatine is just an energy source that's in our body. If I'm vegan and I'm not eating creatine because I'm not eating meat, I'm going to have low creatine stores. If all of a sudden I start eating meat again or start taking creatine, I'm going to have this huge increase in creatine, and creatine pulls water into the cell. So depending on, your current body weight, you could gain anywhere from 3 to 5 pounds just from loading with creatine. And that's because creatine kind of has to, have these water molecules as part of it as it's being moved from inside and outside the cell and being used there for energy. We see that with glycogen as well. If I exercise really hard and deplete my muscle glycogen stores or deplete some of my liver glycogen, as I drink water, that glycogen is going to hold onto that water and bring that back into the cells to help replenish your glycogen stores. And we know, we thought it was about, 1 gram of glycogen, 3 grams of water, but in reality, we've seen in literature that it can be anywhere from 1 to 17 grams, depending on how much you depleted and how much water you're drinking post depletion. So water's super dynamic as it relates to these other molecules in our body that are associated with every cell's energy, like creatine or glucose. What about hypohydration or dehydration? So even prior to actual dehydration, what we see is a slight decrease in performance. So core body temperature increases, there's an increase in cardiovascular strain, your viscosity of your blood changes, it's harder to pump blood around your body, your plasma volume goes down, and then all of a sudden you're having neuromuscular function issues. There's all the sodium and potassium that are making all your electrical currents in your body, and that's those currents and those signals have to be uh, these ions have to flow through some material, and that's water. So as you deplete your water, what happens to your sodium and potassium is they increase in concentration. And those signals now can get disrupted because you don't have that fluid to help transfer those ions from one cell to another cell or from inside of a cell to outside of a cell. And the communication's lost. And when that communication's lost, you can have muscle cramping and all sorts of other issues. So performance decreases, and this isn't just for athletes. This is anybody. If I haven't been hydrating appropriately, and all of a sudden I need to go hang out with my niece or go grocery shopping and do this task or this task, if I'm chronically hypohydrated or dehydrated, my body's never going to fully recover and it's never going to be in optimal performance. That increases our risk for injuries, our falls, or uh, changing your lifestyle so you can do things that you normally wouldn't need to change your lifestyle to do if you were properly hydrated. So here's an example of fluid output. So we see on the left, we see total body water, extracellular fluid, intracellular fluid, and Hydex, which is a hydration index. And Hydex is great at just looking at kind of where the person is relative to a normal population. And as they get dehydrated, they tend to move this way. And this will kind of give an indicator of, hey, are they truly hydrated? Or are they a little hypohydrated right now while we're doing the test? And then how is their hydration going uh, beyond that? And that's just an index. So that's not liters or anything. That's just an index, basically from high to low. Total body water, extracellular fluid, intercellular fluid. Talked a little bit about those, but here's a good idea of how you can view them as percent of body weight or liters or pints, however you want to set up the program. So sometimes we want to look at it as it's relative to your total body water. So how much extracellular water do you have in all your water? Well, this patient has 44.6, and that's pretty much average. And so then their intracellular fluid is also going to be close to average. Now, as one of these goes up or down, the other will respond. But these changes these intercellular, extracellular water changes can impact the wellness of a cell or the wellness of the person without actually changing in total body water. So you can have the same total body water and have massive changes in extracellular and intracellular fluid, especially as it relates to total percent body water. All right, I think I gotta speed up here if I want to get through all this. So body water is extremely important. Understanding intracellular and extracellular, especially extracellular. So having high body water may be a good thing and may be a bad thing. So it really depends on the situation and the person. If you're dealing with heart failure, then it's probably not a good thing. If you're dealing with an athlete who just did a 6 month training program and they've increased their total body water, that might be good because they've added some skeletal muscle mass. So there's the extracellular and intracellular fluids are independent of changes in total body water. So we use all of those separately to get to identify what we can use to help a patient stay on track. So ECF, the extracellular fluid, is basically just everything outside of the cells. So you look at a muscle cell, look at a tiny little smaller cell or hemoglobin or something smaller that our cells are always dynamic, right? There's always this intracellular, extracellular exchange that's going on. When there's an ailment, when there's something that's wrong with health, a lot of times what we'll see is that ECF will start going up. So your body's trying to get rid of diseased cells, it's trying to get rid of waste, it's trying to get rid of byproducts, it's trying to make you healthy. And what's being pushed out of those cells is a bunch of that waste material, and that goes into that extracellular fluid. So what your body says is, oh no, I got all this extra crap coming into my extracellular fluid. I need to move it around so it increases your overall extracellular fluid. And that's how that can be an indicator of health and disease. And we look at it in just volume. It's no different than pouring a pint glass in and it's like, this is how much intracellular water I have. Edema, swelling, obviously extracellular water, you can kind of see, face can get puffy, your arms can swell up, all of these are associated with extracellular fluid. And then obviously if you look at uh, changes relative to intracellular to extracellular fluid, and you see total body go up, intracellular fluid go up, but extracellular fluid did not go up, then that might be something positive that's going on. They may be increasing muscle mass. But if we see extracellular go up and not a change in intracellular, then that may be some issues to look at. And I'll show you a good example there. So intercellular fluid, again, this is the fluid that's all inside the cell. And this really tells you what's going on with the quality and the health of the cell. Uh, muscle's mostly water. 75 to 85% of your muscle, depending on your muscle, is water. And as you increase muscle mass, as you increase size, as you increase strength, the water inside the muscle increases. Decreases are associated with muscle loss, muscle wasting, and things like that. So ICF is a great indicator of performance and overall composition, muscle composition and tissue itself. And then Hydex, again, is just kind of a snapshot of where you are relative to your age, height, uh, gender, weight, and roughly about what your cells should be signaling and how they should be interacting with this electrical current. And again, it's not a great single indicator, but it's great at detecting changes over time. And it does help you kind of see whether or not, like if it's really low, there might be something going on with hypohydration or dehydration. So, but again, tracking all of this over time is extremely important. Skeletal muscle mass is, highly, highly valuable for any individual going through any sort of therapy. And in GLP-1s, we're seeing a lot of muscle wasting and a lot of muscle loss because of caloric restrictions, and we're seeing a lot of protein malnutrition. So we really need to keep an eye on our muscle levels. Low muscle mass, decreases your quality of life. You can't do as much. Uh, it's harder to gain as you get older. So if you lose it, it's tricky. And, you know, it's almost it's pretty much the most important thing if you're trying to live an active lifestyle is maintaining your skeletal muscle health. And fluid is directly related to that. So again, here we can see the two compartment model with ICF, ECF, muscle, organs, bone. All of that's in fat-free mass, and then your fat is everything else. And what we've seen, uh, what we've seen recently is a new indication of like using BMI alone to determine if somebody has excess fat is not really appropriate. And we'll talk about that now. So BMI itself is just a function of height and weight. So it's just your body mass divided by your height in meters squared. And what we see is big individuals, athletic individuals who have low body fat can actually have a high BMI or previously been clinically obese when in reality they're just excessively muscular. So BMI doesn't really tell us about what's going on from a bone, a muscle, water, or fat mass. It's really just, hey, how much weight do you have relative to your height? So here's two individuals with uh, same body fat, very different BMIs. So again, body composition is not measured by BMI. It's just mass of gravity pushing your body down on a scale and your height. It's not a functional measure, doesn't account for strength, doesn't account for quality of the muscle, and it doesn't do anything with swelling or that extracellular fluid. And when we look at different body compositions with similar size individuals, we know that depending on your activity, your diet, and your lifestyle, you can have a lot more fat inside the same a leg that's the same size as a leg that has way more muscle in it. You can't just look at a size and be able to understand all of this intermuscular or this visceral fat. Can you measure that visceral fat with BMI? No. Different people with the same similar bodies will have different amounts of visceral fat, and people will do waist circumference to help identify that, but it's not a quality measure, really. It's a snapshot, and we see that within the same BMI that you can have a body fat somewhere between 45 and 15%. So we know that body BMI is not a great predictor of body fat. And we know body fat helps us identify the or body composition, not just fat, but muscle, where it's located, and the fluid where it's located is all part of this bigger picture of the quality and health of an individual. And we've seen research over and over again that BMI is not necessarily a great indicator of mortality. It's not a great indicator of cardiovascular disease, cancers, and things like that. That's kind of what this uh, image shows here is all these different BMI categories are all having no effect based on all of these chronic illnesses, whether it's cancer, cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease. There's a few categories, and it's usually the extreme categories, the high extreme categories where that risk goes up. The rest down here in BMI categories, anywhere from, you know, 20 all the way up to 30, 35-ish, you can be healthy. And what we see is a decrease in relative mortality, even if you have some body fat. Not all body fat is bad. And we know this for a fact because if you have excess body fat and you go into surgery, you're more likely to have positive outcomes because you have body energy stored. All right, now I really got to move fast. So in this case, here's a picture where we see this individual who had no change in waist circumference, no change in BMI, but they increased their cardiorespiratory health by being more active. They're decreasing their risk without changing in composition. Whereas these other two scenarios are changing based on either waist circumference going down or BMIs decreasing. So we can identify each of these as a factor. Uh, The Lancet recently put out a paper basically reclassifying clinical versus preclinical obesity. And preclinical obesity here requires either a measure of waist measure or a more advanced measure, or direct measurement using a device such as the SOZO for body composition. And the goal, I would say, of a lot of SOZO users currently is the prevention from having to go into having to an actual clinical obesity or clinical uh, diagnosis. So that if we can prevent a disease from occurring by identifying it beforehand, then we can change things with lifestyle and some medications that'll keep that patient as healthy as possible. So how do we break down body composition when it comes to fluid? So we have our total body water, ECF, ICF, and HIDEX, and from all of that information, we can calculate skeletal muscle mass and fat mass. And then we can look at those raw outputs, the BMI. Yeah, sure, we can still look at it. Phase angle, weight, age, and all the comorbidities. So here's a great example, and this is what we're ending on here, of two similar females with similar body composition, similar BMIs, not body compositions, and they're both on GLP-1s medication. And what we see here is this patient, this 59-year-old on the right, has water that's normal. The ECF is a little bit low, which is again probably a good thing, and ICF is high, and their HIDEX is 8.4. Now we look at this other individual, their body water is relatively low, 37.2% versus 47.8%. This person on the left is less healthy. And this extracellular fluid is way up, and ICF is way down, and their total hydration is poor. So we're getting a snapshot into both of these individuals who have very similar BMIs, and their health is much different. And this is after GLP-1 weight loss medication use. So the person on the left is basically withering away, and the person on the right has done an excellent job adhering to protocols to maintain muscle mass and and health in general. So let's look at skeletal muscle mass. Skeletal muscle mass 20.1 versus 23.8, and fat mass is actually off the chart. 49% is off the chart on amount of fat mass that you should have. So this person is has poor muscle mass or less ideal muscle mass than the other individual, and their body fat is much higher. So this is a way, comparison between the two from skeletal muscle to fat mass. So let's look at the other compositions. Protein and mineral. This one that when you stop eating protein, your body will start eating your protein because it needs those amino acids. And your bones will start breaking down. Everything will start breaking down. So when we look at these two individuals, we see this healthier one that followed these protocols to have a much higher uh, protein mineral and phase angle, which is a raw output. It's kind of like that vector we talked about, resistance and reactance. And then overall, their health uh, we see is improved, even though these individuals are 190 pounds versus 191.6 pounds. They weigh almost the same after they went through GLP-1. One of these patients is extremely healthy. The other one needs to do some changes, lifestyle and possibly medication changes. So if we're trying to truly understand health and performance, we of of any individual, we need to know more than just its height and weight. We really need to understand a more holistic, complete approach. And fluid's the most dynamic, it's the most variable. And if we understand fluid, we can make a lot of decisions and really understand how composition's also changing based on that fluid. So, yeah, we're gonna hopefully do a bunch more webinars. I know it's kind of all over the place there, but you'll open it up to some questions now if people have some extra time. You can always email us. We're always getting emails. Pretty much getting emails and sending them to me to help answer them. So if you have any questions about this technology and want to see other webinars, let us know which webinars and content we can put together for everybody to really understand what's going on in the new medical environment now and utilizing technology the best way we can.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moon. That was incredibly insightful. We do have one question that was in the chat. And as a reminder to everyone, we will be sending out a link to the webinar recording in just a few days to anyone who registered. The question is, and I believe Maureen Macbeth is on the line too. Can you speak to how metal prosthetics like a hip arthroplasty is affected by or accounted for with the formulas?
So if you do have, say, a hip replacement or a shoulder replacement, uh, it's going to be metal, and metal is highly conductive, and that will throw off, say, a difference between one arm or another arm, or right leg versus left leg if you have an implant in one leg and you don't have an implant in the other leg. But one of the main goals we're trying to do here is longitudinal repeated measures over time. A lot. If you can measure, if somebody can come into your clinic and just jump on this device and get a fluid reading, every week, every other week, it provides you a great snapshot of what's really happening to them on a regular basis. And as long as you're not changing that implant out, which I hope you're not, that's going to stay the same. So it may not give you the exact, hey, you're at the 50th percentile or your Z-score is this. It may be, oh, you're a little lower, a little over, dependent on that, I guess, whatever the composition of that implant is. Marine probably can touch a little bit more on that, but it doesn't hurt the measurement, and it's not an issue to have for those measurements. It's just the same as if you have an implant for DEXA. DEXA just pixelates that area and actually just subtracts it all, whereas bioimpedance just kind of goes really quick through that wherever that implant's located. And as far as I know, or recently it was approved. Sozo was approved for use with, I think, pacemakers and some uh, other medical devices. What's the ideal time to test menstruating women? So the the issue with considering a time, say a specific phase of menses, is not all women gain weight and lose weight during the same phase of their menstrual cycle. So it's not necessarily, hey, I want to grab this person when they're at this specific phase of their menstrual cycle and have everybody do that. It's more, when are you the heaviest during your period? And I don't want to measure you then. I want to measure you when and this is for accurate body composition. Now, if you actually want to measure somebody and measure them every week and look at their fluid changes. They've done some really, really interesting study with BIS. This was back, I think, in the mid 90s, where they actually did BIS in pregnant women and looked at how that there were changes in extracellular fluid, intercellular fluid as that fetus is growing. So uh, whatever your clinic wants to do and say, everyone, you want to record it for females for sure, because you want to know if there is a weight gain associated with water. And we do see that some variability is not just water. Women's bodies are crazy. They're very dynamic, and they're always changing. So when you add in these hormonal facts, these more hormonal variables with how dynamic water is already, then you have to take a bigger picture and say, all right, are these hormones affecting our body water? Do we account for that? That's kind of up to you. And ImpediMed's working on developing new technology, new ways to interpret things all the time as well.
Jordan, I'll just jump in there too. As a clinician, it was important for a number of my patients who would come in and say, this really bothers me when I have my menstrual cycle. And so it was really nice to actually quantify so that they realized it wasn't just in their head, that they actually were gaining fluid weight, that their muscle wasn't actually changing, but they were gaining fluid weight. And then we could kind of see the cycle with that. So
Right.
it can be very helpful. So you have to test patients when we need to test them. And it depending on what you're testing them for, if it's something for lymphedema, for example, it won't make a difference. But definitely for body composition, you will see those changes in fluid. And just remember, everyone changes throughout the day as well. If you measure yourself in the morning, you're going to have more fluid at the end of the day. That's the normal human variability that we were talking about. So I think that's a great point, though, that definitely put it in your documentation about where the woman is in her menstrual cycle, and get more clarifying data as well, in terms of how long that may last and things. And one other thing I will just clarify is the current SOZO device still has a contraindication for implantable devices like cardiac pacemakers or anything with a motor or battery that you can't
Okay.
remove. But joint replacements and everything like that are fine.
Great. Well, thank you so much again, Dr. Moon. Thank you to all who were able to attend today. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thanks, Julie. Lizzie did just pop on one more question. What's the best ideal time of day to test? Uh, I test my clients in the morning fasted. That's optimal. It's really hard to get everyone to come in a fasted state. And what did they do the night before? Did they go out? Were they drinking? Were they eating a lot? Were they training really hard? And you can have extra fluid volume from training. So there's a lot of value to measuring in a fasted, normally hydrated state in the morning. But really, that's going to give you your most accurate calculations from fluid into body composition in terms of skeletal muscle mass, fat-free mass, and the other variables. But you can measure the same person in the morning and then in the afternoon if you wanted to track those fluids. Don't look at the composition differences, though. Just look at those fluids.
Great. Thank you for that. We are going to wrap it up. We're at the top of the hour, so we'll answer any additional questions offline. But again, thank you for your time today and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.